What if one woman convinced the world's smartest investors, the most powerful doctors, and even the US government that she had changed medicine forever? What if she raised $700 million on a technology that never worked? And what if every single word of it was a lie? Elizabeth Ann Holmes was born on February 3, 1984 in Washington, D.C. Her father, Christian Holmes, was a vice president at Enron, the infamous energy company. Her mother, Noelle Holmes, worked as a congressional staffer. From the age of 9, Elizabeth had one goal. When her family asked what she wanted to be when she grew up, she said, "I want to be a billionaire." Elizabeth grew up in Houston, Texas, where she attended St. John's School, one of the most expensive private schools in the city. She was obsessed with Steve Jobs. She read every book about him. She studied every interview. She wanted to be exactly like him, a visionary who changed the world. In 2002, at 18 years old, Elizabeth enrolled at Stanford University in Palo Alto, California, studying chemical engineering. It was here that she met her professor, Channing Robertson, who became one of her biggest supporters, but she also developed an intense fear of needles, and that fear would become the seed of her idea. In 2003, at just 19 years old, Elizabeth Holmes dropped out of Stanford University and used her tuition money to found Theranos in Palo Alto, California. The name Theranos combined the words therapy and diagnosis. Her idea was revolutionary, a small device called the Edison that could run hundreds of medical tests from just one tiny drop of blood taken from a finger prick. No needles, no expensive labs, no long waiting times. Elizabeth Holmes transformed herself completely. She wore the same black turtleneck as Steve Jobs every single day. She deliberately lowered her voice to sound more authoritative and powerful, speaking in a deep baritone that many who knew her said was completely fake. She rehearsed her presentations for hours. She even copied Jobs' famous reality distortion field, the ability to make people believe the impossible was possible. The money started pouring in. George Shultz, former U.S. Secretary of State, invested and joined the board. Rupert Murdoch, the media billionaire, invested $125 million. The DeVos family invested $100 million. The Walton family, owners of Walmart, invested heavily. Even former U.S. Secretary of Defense James Mattis joined the board. In total, Holmes raised over $700 million from some of the most powerful people in America. By 2013, Theranos had over 800 employees working across its offices in Palo Alto and Newark, California. The company had signed a major partnership with Walgreens, one of America's biggest pharmacy chains, to put Theranos testing centers inside their stores across America. The company was valued at $9 billion, and Elizabeth Holmes herself was worth $4.5 billion on paper, making her the youngest self-made female billionaire in American history. But behind the glossy offices and the billions of dollars, there was a devastating truth. The Edison device didn't work. The blood tests were dangerously inaccurate. Patients across America were receiving completely false results. Some patients were told they had HIV when they were perfectly healthy. Others were told they had cancer when they didn't. And some patients who actually needed urgent treatment were told they were fine. Inside Theranos, many scientists and engineers knew the technology wasn't working, but Elizabeth Holmes and her partner Ramesh Balwani, also known as Sunny, created an atmosphere of extreme fear and intimidation. Employees were forbidden from talking to each other about their work. Anyone who raised concerns was fired immediately. Some employees who tried to speak out were threatened with expensive lawsuits that would financially destroy them. In early 2015, Wall Street Journal investigative reporter John Carreyrou, based in New York, received a tip from a contact. He began secretly meeting with former Theranos employees who were terrified of speaking out. Over months of investigation, the truth emerged. For most tests, Theranos was secretly using conventional Siemens laboratory machines, not the Edison device. The Edison could only accurately run a very small number of tests. Everything else was a lie. On October 15, 2015, the Wall Street Journal published Carreyrou's devastating investigation. The article shocked the medical and business world, but Holmes fought back hard. She appeared on CNBC calling the story utterly false and misleading. She went on NBC News. She gave interviews to every major outlet. She called Carreyrou a liar trying to destroy a company that was changing medicine. But the truth could no longer be hidden. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration and the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services launched formal investigations into Theranos. What they found inside the Newark, California laboratory was deeply alarming. The lab was operating completely outside accepted safety standards. Equipment was not properly calibrated. Results were not being verified. In July 2016, regulators banned Elizabeth Holmes personally from operating any blood testing laboratory in the United States for 2 years. The collapse was swift and total. Walgreens terminated its partnership with Theranos and shut down all 40 testing centers inside their stores. Safeway, another major grocery chain that had invested $350 million building special Theranos clinics in their stores, wrote off the entire investment. The company's value collapsed from $9 billion to essentially nothing. By September 2018, Theranos officially shut down, laying off all remaining employees. On June 15, 2018, the United States Department of Justice in San Francisco indicted Elizabeth Holmes and her former partner Ramesh Sunny Balwani on 9 counts of wire fraud and 2 counts of conspiracy to commit wire fraud against investors and patients. Holmes faced a maximum sentence of 20 years in federal prison for each count. The trial began on August 31, 2021 in San Jose, California, and lasted 4 months. The prosecution called over 20 witnesses. Former employees described the culture of fear inside Theranos. Patients testified about how false results had devastated their lives. One patient described receiving a false positive HIV result from a Theranos test, causing months of unbearable psychological suffering before other tests confirmed it was a mistake. On January 3, 2022, after 7 days of deliberation, the jury returned its verdict. Elizabeth Holmes was found guilty on 4 counts, 1 count of conspiracy to defraud investors and 3 counts of wire fraud against individual investors. The woman who had promised to revolutionize medicine and had raised $700 million had been found guilty of fraud. On November 18, 2022, Judge Edward Davila sentenced Elizabeth Holmes to 11 years and 3 months in federal prison at the federal prison camp in Bryan, Texas. She was also ordered to pay $452 million in restitution to her victims. Holmes reported to prison on May 30, 2023. The girl from Washington, D.C., who wanted to be a billionaire and become the next Steve Jobs, was now inmate number 25935-111. But the real victims of the story are the thousands of ordinary people who were hurt, patients who received false diagnoses and suffered unnecessary fear and anxiety, patients who delayed getting real medical treatment because Theranos told them they were fine, investors who lost their life savings, and hundreds of employees who lost their jobs, their careers, and their professional reputations working for a company that was built entirely on lies from day one. The story of Elizabeth Holmes is more than just one woman's fraud. It is a warning about the dangerous culture of Silicon Valley, where founders are pressured to promise revolutionary change at any cost, where the phrase "fake it till you make it" can cross the invisible line from ambition into crime. Always demand proof, always ask questions, no matter how charismatic the person, no matter how revolutionary the idea sounds. If the evidence is not there, walk away. This has been the true and complete story of Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos, the biggest medical fraud in Silicon Valley history. Subscribe to Skim Report for more real stories of fraud and deception from around the world. Hit the bell so you never miss a story. New video every week. Like this video if the story of Elizabeth Holmes shocked you. Comment below and tell us, did you know about Theranos before watching this? And subscribe to Scam Report and hit the bell. We have more shocking true stories coming every week. Don't miss them.